And then there is one form of direct aid it comes in the form of a food pantry. Some of those services would be offered in partnership with Interfaith, for example, some of the job training services or housing assistance services. And just to cover the basics here, the project site is within the RM 2200, that's the residential multifamily 2,200 square foot zone. It is also within the medium density general plan designation. And the zoning code specifies that a nonprofit service organization requires approval of a conditional use permit as submitted within the RM 2200 zone. And just to cover some more basics here, so the project site is approximately 1.77 acres. That church building, former church building, is 12,500 square feet. The site includes 110 parking spaces, and notably it's right on the valley floor, so it's surrounded by multiple multifamily residential projects and office uses, as well as the medical clinic directly adjacent to the north. There is interconnecting access via that west drive aisle with the healthcare clinic to the north. And to kind of help visualize that, here's the project aerial. You'll see that the site is accessed off of Mollison, East Madison, and then again that western drive, west, let me see if I can point it out here. This west drive aisle for the healthcare clinic has interconnecting access with this site. Here's the project site plan. Again, 110 parking spaces, 12,000 square foot existing structure. And then you can see as well, number 7 here is that call out for the interconnecting access. And then this is the proposed floor plan. Again, largely similar to as it was as a church. They're leaving a large community meeting area to support all of their different programming. Interfaith would have a dedicated office space within the, the different meeting areas. And then let's move on here. So there's a couple of pertinent planning permits that are already in place for this project. The first being conditional use permit number 116, and that was what originally authorized the religious facility at this site. It was amended as recently as 78, but largely unchanged since then. The other pertinent planning permit is specific plan number 513. And so when the medical clinic was expanded, they found that they could not meet the on-site parking requirements. SB number 513 authorized off-site parking on the adjacent then religious facility site. And so in perpetuity, the religious facility site would provide 16 parking spaces for use by the medical clinic. And that is still in effect today. And so that would be factored into their parking calculation for this project. Using the general office parking ratio, this project would be, there would be excess parking. Basically, the assembly use ratio for the former religious facility is higher. And so it actually has excess parking due to the general office parking ratio. And then I just wanted to briefly touch on the uses again. It is a kind of a wide variety of uses. Again, most of them dealing though with navigating different services, enrolling in different medical programs or other programs, translation services, job training, job shadowing programs, senior services, housing services. So it is a wide variety of social services and navigation services. But there is also the component of administration, definitely a lot of office space, and then the food pantry and food assistance, food security services that I also mentioned. And due to those services, we have recommended some proposed conditions. For example, staff have recognized that the public parking situation in that area is sometimes a little challenging. And so there is a condition of approval that staff and clients would be encouraged to park on site. Again, the site should support more parking in general for the two for the kind of the shared space there now. Another recommended or another proposed condition is that the services be provided indoors. We recognize that there were some issues with queuing lines that would extend into parking areas with the previous food pantry that was offered by the religious facility. And so trying to contain that as much as possible. No loitering is also one of the proposed conditions. And then compliance with the zoning code standards for cleanliness of the parking area and all those exterior yard areas. Also, obviously, the conditional use permit acts as a mechanism that can be revoked if there is non-compliance with those conditions. The police recommendation for this project was for approval. They said that it would not impact their services. And I did want to mention one thing too that came in since the agenda report was finalized. We did receive one public comment letter, which I believe was forwarded to you by Laura a couple evenings ago. And so with that, moving on to the recommendation, just a reminder of what the required findings are for either approving or denying a conditional use permit. First, being that it should be consistent with the general plan goals and policies and any other governing specific plans. In this case, there are a few goals and policies that this project would be consistent with, listed in the staff report. That is consistent with all applicable use and development standards. No new development is proposed, and a change of occupancy building permit would be required for this. So to ensure compatibility with all building codes, fire codes. The operations should be consistent with surrounding uses. Again, I think with the normal operation of an office use, a service center, there shouldn't be any major impacts, but we do have those additional proposed conditions to make sure that it is operated consistent with the surrounding properties. The project should not be detrimental to public health and safety. There's no expected impacts in regard to public health and safety from this project, and that the project be in the best interest of the public convenience and necessity. And I do think that this is in a key area on the valley floor. It also kind of replaces what was formerly a community organization, a church. So I think that finding can be met as well. And with that, staff recommend approval of conditional use permit number 2020-0008, subject to conditions. And we are always here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Spencer. Do any of my fellow commissioners have questions for staff? Commissioner Pollock-Grood? Oh, that was a no.
I have a question. Yes, the pantry service, is that on a daily basis, weekly, monthly? What are the increments of service provided for pantry service?
I'm not certain, but I do know that the applicant team is waiting to speak under public comment, so that'd be a great question for them.
And also queuing will be on private property, not on the street itself? Correct,
yeah. So the conditions of approval would establish that all business, just like any other commercial zone property, would be conducted indoors. Obviously, right now, that's maybe a little bit more challenging due to the ongoing pandemic, but there would be other temporary approvals that would have to be acquired if there were to be any sort of outdoor queuing at this point. So the condition establishes that business should be conducted indoors.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
So just in regards to the parking situation that the resident was referring to, that was a situation because of church services prior where you think there'll be less load on this parking lot now, is that correct?
So I think that, it would be kind of a more informal sharing situation at this point, since they are operated by the same operators. We had discussed at a staff level earlier that maybe additional signage to make that clear would be necessary. And the applicant team was amenable to that. So I definitely think that's something they should look into to make sure that people understand that there is additional parking at the adjacent site.
Thank you.
And Darren, I believe the question about the parking was not so much on the weekend, but weekday with the community health center parking that overflows on Mollison. and
Oh,
Madison.
yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
All right, Commissioner Cabrera.
Mr. Hayes, so there is I recollect because I know this area very well. I just want to confirm there is a wall, a CMU wall, I believe, between the neighborhood healthcare and the residences, right, presently. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And then there'd be I think it's a wrought iron gate that would connect the interconnecting access area between those two properties.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to eventually hear from the from both of the healthcare about the timing and how the food pantry distribution is going to function.
All right, any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. Mr. Valles, do we have speakers?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We do have Mike DeLeon, who is the applicant, and also Carl Higgins, who is the representative. And additionally, we had, well, there she is, Jessica Hillis, and she's the one that wrote the letter and wanted to speak as well.
All right. Let's
And I
go ahead and
see-
bring,
I'm sorry, I'm seeing that Rakesh Patel, who I believe is a project representative, has his hand up.
all right. Let's bring Jessica Hillis in first.
Hello,
Good evening, Jessica.
are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Do you need to see me or just hear me?
If you just want to speak on the phone, that's fine. If you want to bring your video in, that's fine as well.
Well, I have the video up, so I'm not sure why we're not being seen, but if you can hear me, that's fine.
Okay. So go ahead. Now's your opportunity to address the Planning Commission.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you tonight. I did draft a letter. I wanted to make sure that I had read the agenda before bringing up any concerns that I had. So at least I had some idea of what was going into that facility. I've lived there for almost 30 years, so I've definitely seen things, change over the course of that time. And the biggest concern, of course, is how busy that street is with a couple of schools in the area, and the clinic has gotten, bigger. It went from a 1-story building to a 2-story building, and there's only about 40 parking spaces provided for the patients. So of course they use our street parking, which is not normally a problem, except when you've got schools in session getting out at the same time as patients that are trying to find parking that is not available in those small lots. They block traffic. They block my driveway. They actually park in my driveway. Then it got to the point where the New Break Church on every Friday would start handing out free food to the community. And if it was church members only, which it might have been, but maybe some extras scooted in there too, they would just hand out boxes of food with you take it all or you don't take it at all. And every Friday there would be a huge, huge amount of people. They would close off the entire front parking lot so that way all the, I don't know, 100 people, 100 families would be able to queue inside the parking lot to grab their box of food. And then those people would kind of, swarm the streets, and they would then dig through the food and just throw what they didn't want on the sidewalk. And it was just very disrespectful. And it was a mess that I would find myself often having to clean up. And then I'm afraid that having this food bank, I would like to know more about this food bank. Is it open to anybody who just walks in? Is it a take all or nothing? So if that could be clarified, I would like to maybe not have something like that and not have a repeat of what was going on for several months from the church that was there prior. I'm afraid of more traffic, bringing in possibly unsavory characters that would drop food on my streets, more parking, especially if you're going to have the clinic using that space, which they are now. They're not just doing the little 16 spaces in the back that the church parking lot has given them. They're also using the front lot. I don't know if it's for staff or if it's for patients, but Monday through Friday, there are more cars parked in that lot as well as on the streets and filling up those lots and still in front of my house. So I'm thinking that the food pantry is going to start bringing more people in, more parking problems, especially if you give anything away for free. And so that's my biggest concern, unless there's some sort of an alternative where they get only on a certain day where there is less traffic, maybe on a weekend. Do we, and my thing is do we know how many staff are using those parking lots to park their cars in, so that way they, from the clinic that are not using the patient parking? And we've got many large apartment complexes in the area that don't have enough parking spaces, so they are also taking up our street parking. So those are some of the concerns. Big concerns are
mention the name of
so I mean, because Key Largo, they just recently, I believe in the last couple of years, built a couple new buildings on their space, which used to be parking spaces. And so those people are now trying to find parking on my street and the surrounding little streets on Madison. So, I mean, those are the biggest, concerns of mine is, trying to just get into my own driveway and having people parked across them or even rudely in them and telling me, yes, I live here, when they don't, just so they can have a space to sort through their food that they don't want and then to dump it on the grounds outside of my house. I think I've
those are
most of it.
okay. I can refer to staff to find out if we've got a number of staff for the health clinic, but I think that might be a better question for the applicant that we can bring up.
Correct. Yeah, I don't have that exact figure.
Mr. Cabrera?
Yeah, so I would like to discuss, ask Jessica Hillis a couple questions, just to kind of build on what I had asked previously. I actually went to school at El Cajon Valley. I know that area well, and the junior high school on the other side. And my doctor actually was out of the space across the street from you. So the neighborhood, as I know it, has a lot of parking difficulties with the apartments across the way and up the way, and especially during certain times. So would those time periods be more difficult, let's say, in your experience, between 2 and 3 o'clock and early in the morning when the kids are coming and going to school? Or what time periods do you see as the most difficult for the parking?
Most definitely early in the mornings. I don't know what time school starts, but with the two schools, the high school and the middle school,
Right.
would say starting around 7:30 to probably 9, giving whatever 0 period to second period. I don't know how schools are now. Easily that time. Plus, we got to take into account that right up Mollison is the 8 freeway entrance. So kids get dropped off by their parents maybe early, and then everybody's going to the freeway. So there's at least that congestion too. And then the kids getting out of school probably around 2 to 3 at the same time. This, and now it's just the flow going the other way, people picking up their kids to go home. And then again, freeways or and such. And I don't know if we get so much traffic, but less than a mile up the street is Johnson Elementary. I don't think that the kids are coming toward my direction, but parents could be coming, down the street toward that. So we've got quite a few schools, and we've got a big light with a freeway entrance right there that everybody wants to seem to go to early in the morning and middle of the afternoon. And so those will be 2 times where we definitely don't want to have really any activity of that would bring people to that corner.
So my other understanding is that you've seen bags of food in your neighborhood or some food items left in your yards from the previous food distribution. Is that correct?
That is correct. Usually it's less, it is, I wouldn't say bags of food, but when the church would give away food, the top thing that people would throw away would be a box full of fruit. I guess nobody wanted the tangerines or whatever it was. And so they would just drop the box off. And maybe if you had a group of 3 or 4 people and nobody wanted their 5 or 6 tangerines or whatever it was, they just all pile it into the box and just leave it in front of my yard, at the little grassy area in front of my curb. And it would sit there from Friday until trash night on Wednesday. And by that time it was pretty rancid and rotten. And sometimes I'd have to take a shovel and scrape it literally off the ground. And that is if the kids from the high school didn't decide to kick it randomly down the street, and then it would spread from my house to the neighbor's house. And so if you were lucky, it was a bag of bread. If you were unlucky, it was fruit in the summertime that would rot. So it became quite a frequent problem.
So we had a similar problem at the Salvation Army with food distribution, and we seem to have solved it almost 100% by doing a needs assessment study and then figuring out to do a food choice food pantry, which seems to have solved the problem with the neighborhood quite well. So I think there's ways around it. So thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the speaker from the Planning Commission? All right. Thank you, Jessica. Ron, can we bring up the next speaker?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Rakesh Patel.
Okay. Good evening, Rakesh.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. So my name is Rakesh Patel. I'm the CEO of Neighborhood Healthcare. Just wanted to, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about neighborhood and, of course, answer some of the concerns and questions that just came up. Just very briefly, Neighborhood Healthcare has been in El Cajon for over 20 years, serving the community and really focusing on meeting the needs of the low-income populations, providing not only medical services and mental health services, but also starting to look more around what we call the social determinants of health, which are some of these things that we're talking about here of food, housing, other support services that in a lot of ways impact the health of our patients, the communities, much more than sometimes even diabetes or high blood pressure. And so this space that we've, the church parking, church lot, what our plans there is to really start to address some of those other concerns that our patients have. We don't see a lot of new patients going into this space on a given day, so increasing foot traffic. Most of this space will be for staff who will be coordinating care for our patients, so linking them to services. And so we envision maybe an additional 10 patients or a day passing through that location, because honestly, most of the work is done through like social work, for instance. In terms of the parking, the parking is vital, obviously, for our patients, and the closest we can get to our site, the better, as many of them suffer from various ailments and things like that. And so with this proposed space, we will be at 110 parking spots, which is quite a bit more than the 64 that's required, and hopefully should not spill onto the streets. So we don't want our patients on the streets anymore either. It's a busy road. And so the more that we can keep them in the property, we're in full agreement and share some of the concerns that were raised with the various apartment complexes in the area and the limited parking. In terms of the food pantry, so we've had experience in doing food pantries. This prior food experience that was put on by the church, we tried to help support some of that by providing our security as a volunteer during that time. But in some of our other locations, like in Palma Valley, we work with partners. In Escondido, we work with Interfaith, similar to how you spoke about the Salvation Army, kind of learning best practices to ensure that we're delivering or providing food that the community wants, because it's a waste of resources, and of course not only for the food, but then also the cleanup that is subsequent to that. And so our goal would be very similar, to make sure that we are providing nutritious foods that our patients want. Our goal would be really to service our patients first and foremost, the patients that we've identified. One of the things that we do when a patient walks into our health center is to screen them for social determinants of health, meaning that we ask them questions like, do you have enough food to last you till the next time you get food? Do you have stable housing? And through identification of patients, we link them to resources, and we're trying to find those partners in the community that are trusted, that we know that our patients can get that services. So our goal is not to attract a huge group of patients onto the property. It's really to support our patients in meeting the needs that so they can live their best lives. Since we've taken over the church property, we've added security both during the day as well as nighttime. There's been a reduction in calls to that property since adding the security. And with the food pantry, in terms of frequency, what we usually do is something maybe once a month. It's definitely not weekly. That's not something that we would do. But it would be something monthly. The time would be flexible, and I understand the concerns of school. There's no reason to inundate the area with more foot traffic. It is a busy street. I completely agree with that. I'm a practicing family doc. I practiced in El Cajon for 16 years, so I'm pretty well versed in that area as well. And yeah, it is busy. And so I think we would obviously do the best. We want to be a good neighbor and a community partner. And really, our goal is also to improve the health of the community so that they're not needing as many city services as well. If we can provide these services, I think our goal is mutual, as it is yours, for a healthy, well-functioning community. I think I answered all the questions. If I didn't, happy to take some.
All right, thank you, Rakesh. You answered some of the parking questions. One that I didn't get the answer to is, how many of those parking spots are going to be used by staff?
I believe, I don't have the exact number of staff. So I think we have about 50 staff on there, and there's about 110 slots is what of the new parking on top of what we had before. Yeah.
That's a fair guesstimate anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
All right. Questions from Planning Commissioner, Mr. Cabrera.
Dr. Rakesh, I thank you for all you're doing for the community, and I look forward to working closely together with you in the future. I think it's a great idea. Let me ask you the question about security, because you brought that up, and that was one of my key points. I do find that food distribution, particular if it's heavy, it doesn't seem like you're going to have heavy, should always be combined with security. So what are the security, the things that you do for your security presently? Or do you have that 24/7, or do you only have it during food distribution, or you only have it at night, or how does your security actually function?
Yeah, so we actually have our own security guard during the day, and then we have a night patrol. And what was happening is when we took over the property, there were some issues, especially at night. And so one of the first things that we did was bring on night patrol, and that's really drastically reduced. I think people thought of it as a vacant building, and so that, of course, with that comes some challenges, but we're not facing those anymore.
It also seems that you're very flexible in working with the community about the hours of the food distribution. Am I correct in assuming that?
Absolutely. We're founded on the community. One of my board members is a patient in El Cajon, so we want to be good stewards of the community, the work that we do. So absolutely, that's not an issue for us at all.
So I only have one more technical question. I noticed that your floor plan shows that you have the community food pantry in the rear of the building. Let's say on the side where the park is. And you have your ADA handicapped accessible bathroom also in that area. So it seems to me logically that when you do the distribution, you're gonna probably do it from the rear side of the property. Is that correct?
I believe so. That's where they were doing that before, in the back, and I think it was to try to minimize the traffic in the front.
I think that's a good idea. I would try to just take another look at it looks like you have plenty of ADA parking. I would just kind of have you consider that since the food distribution is going to be at the back, that maybe you add maybe parking spots 56 and 57 could be ADA parking spots, instead of them having to go all the way from the front and come all the way around or go through, so they can get to that ADA bathroom and to the food distribution. So I would like to see just a little bit of consideration for that parking situation.
Okay. Yeah, I would add that during these events, we also have community outreach workers that are out there to support the patients as well. So I think there'll be additional resources. But yeah, I think that's easy enough for us to do.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the effort to do this. It's going to be a great thing for the community. And it sounds like you definitely know how to partner up with other community groups. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners with questions for our speaker? All right, thank you, Dr. Patel. Mr. Valles, do we have any other speakers?
Mr. Chair, nobody else has raised their hand, and also there are no chat comments.
I do believe we had a previous request for Carl Higgins and perhaps Mike DeLeon to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Carl if you would like to speak.
Good evening, Carl. Are you there, Carl? I'm not hearing anything. Is anyone else hearing?
No, I'm not either. We'll try again later. Perhaps we'll go to Mike DeLeon in the meantime.
Yeah. And Carl, if you're there and we just couldn't hear you, I see your hand raised. We'll come back to you, Carl.
Okay, Mike is unmuted.
Hello.
My name is Mike.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Mike Dillon. I'm the facilities director over at Neighborhood Health. Dr. Patel answered the questions that were put out there, some of the topics I was going to talk on. So I really don't have anything to say other than I'm here for any additional detailed questions if you guys have any.
Okay, thank you. Let me check with my fellow commissioners if they have any questions for you. I'm seeing no questions at the moment. Dr. Patel, you did a great job. Thank you, Mike. All right, let's see if we can get a hold of Carl again. He's got his hand raised.
We did just get a chat response from him that it sounds like he's unable to connect with audio, but I will give it one more go here.
Okay. And Carl, I'll mention that if we can't hear you, you can still put any comments you want to share in the Q&A or in the chat windows.
Okay, so he has responded. He says, I'm good, thanks. So I think we can move on.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you for attending. Are there any others who wish to speak on this item tonight? If you do wish to speak, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat and we will acknowledge you and make sure you're heard. Give you a few more moments. And Mr. Baez, were there any other chat or questions that were posted that we should answer?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. I do not see any more hands raised, so I will go ahead and make a motion to close the public hearing. If I can get a second on that.
I'll second it.
Motion made by Commissioner Circo, second by Commissioner Sotile. Roll vote, please.
Paul Circle,
Yes.
Humbert Cabrera,
Yes.
Darren Morose,
Yes.
Rebecca Pollock-Rude,
Yes.
Anthony Sotile.
Yes.
This motion passes unanimously.
Right. Let's see. So this item is not moving on to the City Council. If anyone wishes to appeal the decision made by the Planning Commission tonight, they should do so by submitting an appeal with the filing of a form, filing of a form and payment of a filing fee no later than 5 p.m. Monday, December 14th, 2020 at the City Clerk's office.
Excuse me,
All right.
Chairman Circo, I believe we
Yeah.
still need a vote on the actual CUP.
That's true. We closed the public hearing, but we did not make a motion on the CUP. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
I'd like to move to adopt the CUP. I think that the going from assembly to office professional from 64 to 110 parking spots, the 64 required to 110, I think staff has done a great job. I would just like to move to adopt the resolution and the CUP. I think it's 2020-0008. Subject to conditions, but I'd like to add the condition of the timing of the distribution to not be within the school hours.
You have a comment before we vote.
All right, Mr. Sotile.
I agree with Commissioner Cabrera's recommendations. However, I'd like to add one of my own. I would like to be able to revisit this CUP in 6 months. And the reasoning behind my revisiting is if there is problems with queuing out in the street or people throwing trash out in the street or the neighborhood, I would like to see if that actually happens or not. So it gives us an opportunity to review it, either confirm the CUP or completely reject it. I would like to add that condition as well.
I would like to amend my the resolution to include Mr. Sotile's, Commissioner Sotile's recommendation.
All right,
That being said, I'll second.
Commissioner Pollock-Rude.
Just really quick, because the parking lot is rather large, but if they are having the food pantry, just to make sure that they do the handout in a way that's best use of the parking lot, so it doesn't go out in the street, because there is a lot of cars on the street, and if it does back up into the street, I think it will cause congestion. And there is a bus stop, I think, right across the way. I think it was on Madison. So if there is, I just don't want it to become a big, long, line of cars that goes out into the street. I know it's hard to confine it to that, but I know with the parking lot the way that it is, they can maybe use the best use of the parking lot to get people through there in a timely fashion without backing up into traffic and into the streets.
Okay, so what I'm gathering, and I don't know if Ms. Mrose agrees with my fellow commissioners on this, but we've got two main concerns, and one is the parking, especially around food distribution time. And the other one is, well, I guess the two are food distribution and the parking on the street. So I'm for putting in review in 6 months and seeing how things go. I believe Dr. Patel has a good plan. And with the extra space that they have, they should be able to make good decisions utilizing that space for both the patients, the staff, and their occasional food distribution. So let's add a revisit in 6 months. I agree with that. And let Dr. Patel work on the details of the food distribution with the community. I don't think that school hours are necessarily the best to limit them with. It's the school drop-off and pickup hours that are the problems. Midday normally isn't a problem. It's the school rushes and the work rushes. Is everyone amenable to that?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And if we find in 6 months that there are problems with food distribution, then we can revisit that issue specifically.
Excuse me, Commissioner Serco, may we please have the motion restated with the new additional?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you want to do it? Or you would like me to restate it?
If you would like to restate it, go ahead.
Okay, so I would like to move to adopt the next resolution in order approving proposed CEQA exemption and CUP 2020-0008, subject to conditions, including the condition of the timing of the food distribution to be around school drop-off and pickup, not within those hours, and to be revisited within 6 months.
I second that motion.
All right. Motion made by Commissioner Cabrera, second by Commissioner Sotile. Mr. Valles, roll vote, please.
Yes, Paul Circle,
Yes.
Humber Cabrera,
Yes.
Darren Morose,
Yes.
Rebecca Pollock-Rude,
Yes.
Anthony Sotile.
Yes.
These resolutions pass unanimously.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
All right. Now I will revisit my comment about this action is final unless appealed with the filing form and payment of a filing fee no later than 5 p.m. Monday, December 14th. All right. Agenda item number 3. This is the business and economic development post-COVID. It is an informational item, so it is exempt from CEQA, and staff is recommending that we provide input.
Thank you so much. So the item before you today, as mentioned, is an informational item. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Spencer. And this is really coming about as we recognize the more long-term need for assistance to businesses and further measures to encourage new investment in El Cajon. We know that businesses have been devastated by the restrictions caused by the COVID pandemic. And while the city has been able to participate with some short-term financial assistance in terms of the CARES Act distribution, which was direct financial assistance to small business, and there have been some temporary measures that have been put in place as well to allow businesses to move their operations outdoors with no fee temporary use permits, a relaxation and around sidewalk dining, that there's really a need to think on a more long-term basis in terms of recovery, how we can really foster a business environment in El Cajon that's supportive of our existing businesses and fosters new business and encourages new investment. Next slide. So we brainstormed and came up with several ideas, and these are really just ideas at this point. We haven't gone into detail into research. The idea is that we are getting your input on whether or not you think any of these ideas have merit at this point. And if so, then we would return to the Planning Commission in January with a resolution of intent to amend the zoning code. Many of these measures would require a change to our zoning regulations in order to implement them. So I will go through them briefly, but I'll probably pause maybe at the end of this slide to get input and then pause at the end of the next slide, just so you can kind of have them fresh in your mind. The first one that we've identified is the opportunity for some outdoor merchandise display. It's not really permitted in El Cajon with a few minor exceptions. And we think there could be some options for businesses such as a clothing store to maybe have a rack of clothing displayed near the front of their store in a way that minimizes any impacts on the adjacent area, but also gives them more visibility, could possibly boost sales. Excuse me. The next item that we're considering is in and around food trucks and food stalls. If you recall, the Planning Commission approved some standards in permitting back in, I believe, 2015 to allow for food trucks with a permit, an administrative zoning permit. This only allowed for food trucks that operate at one specific location. So to date, we've only had one of these permits approved, which I think shows that it's not really a viable option for food trucks to operate in that way. So we think maybe instead of a permit process, just coming up with some standards to allow for them to operate in locations where there's big enough parking lots that they can do so on a more flexible basis might be a good opportunity. The next one is a consideration of expanding what's allowed under a home occupation business. So right now, if you have a home occupation business in El Cajon, you can have an office. You can't have any employees come to your house or any customers come to your house. You're also very limited in terms of anything else that you can store at your home. When we were working on the climate action plan, one of the measures that actually came out of that was how do we locate people's homes and their business services or their employment closer together to reduce the distance people need to travel. And so we can talk about here about maybe allowing for some limitation or limited employees and customers to access, business services at somebody's home business location. For instance, an accountant could have maybe, a certain number of customers per day come to their home to receive services. The next item is around parking. So right now in El Cajon, if you have an existing commercial or industrial building and a new business wants to come in and locate there, if that's a different type of business than the one that was previously there, it could trigger a new parking requirement. But because the site's already built, the opportunity to add any additional parking is often fairly limited. So that really constrains property owners and businesses when they're locating in some of these existing buildings because they may not be able to achieve the new parking requirement. So the thought there would be to allow for these buildings to be reused with permitted uses without needing to review the parking. So I think that would be a good opportunity for me maybe to pause and get some initial feedback if that works for you, Chairman Serco.
Yes, absolutely. And why don't we take them one at a time and see what feedback the commissioners have on each layer. The outdoor merchandise displays, for example. The first thing that comes to my mind is that we've got some wide sidewalks, some very broad sidewalks in downtown El Cajon, where this wouldn't have any impact at all. I think it's a great idea. And we might just need to watch where the sidewalks are narrower on what is allowed outside. But that would all be part of the zoning plan update, is figuring out the specific language of the sidewalk is 10 feet wide. You can have a display up to X feet out of your store. The sidewalk is 4 feet wide. You have a display of 1 foot or something to that effect. What do my fellow commissioners think about the outdoor merchandise? Mr. Cabrera.
I like the all of these items in the out of box thinking. As far as the outside merchandise display, I think La Mesa kind of has something that we maybe want to look at where it's allowable as long as you keep the 3-foot corridor for ADA accessibility. That might be one way to approach it. The other way would be the other item that I'd like to see included in that is signage. I'd like to see reduced restrictions or necessary permits for temporary signage that they might need to display this, to advertise these displays. Other than that, I think that's my only comment on the merchandise display.
Well, and with the signage, I think that's a good idea, just as long as it isn't intrusive in walkways for the same reasons the product isn't, you know, because sometimes people have the pull out
Correct.
signs that they could put outside, but yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Any other feedback on the outdoor merchandise? Commissioner
No, I think
Rose?
it's a great idea as well. I commend the city for thinking outside the box on that.
I agree. I think the best solution, though, that we all go back to business as it was before. That would be the best solution. However, since we can't do that, this is the second best solution that we can come up with. As long as it doesn't become a nuisance and also doesn't block foot traffic, or like Commissioner Cabrera stated, ADA compliant regulations.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to food trucks and food stalls. When we first approved this change to the zoning ordinance to allow for food trucks, we made it very, very tight. And at the time, I was dissenting in that opinion because I know food trucks live going from one place to another. And so streamlining some approvals and having a standards, I think we could even get to the point where we could maybe locate some parking areas where a food truck would be welcome and have that be a food truck parking spot. If we could add that into the zoning ordinance and say, if a food truck just shows up in El Cajon and says, hey, where can I go? We already have spots picked out. That would be good. But standards for when, say, this restaurant wants to bring in something fun extra, or church wants to have food trucks for an event, if we ever are allowed to have events like that again. But to have standards that then we would have food trucks qualified by our standards to operate in the city with more flexibility. I think that is fabulous and will allow for the entrepreneurs to flourish in our city. Any feedback on food trucks?
I do have a concern, Mr. Chairman. My concern is, are we giving to existing restaurants who have a permanent location where they're struggling to keep their doors open, and then have food trucks to compete as well? That's like putting another nail in the coffin to me, to certain restaurants, unless the restaurants are allowed to have their own food trucks, where it might keep them alive and going. Do you understand what I'm trying to bring up here?
Absolutely. I've actually seen a couple of restaurants that used to just be hole-in-the-wall restaurants that currently are delivering food because that's how they are able to stay alive. So this might create some competition for existing restaurants, or it might be a way for existing restaurants to stay alive during all the increased restrictions. But I don't see it being a humongous pressure on existing restaurants.
You don't think so? Let's say there's a restaurant that cannot serve people inside and there's a food truck there. People, of course, will go to the food truck, not create a kind of a, brokenheartedness in the restaurant's business that end up paying taxes, property taxes, in order to have that business going. You don't think that would be a dilemma for current
I think
business
that
owners?
situation could be easily resolved within our standards by making it so that if there's an existing restaurant, they would be the ones to invite the food truck. It wouldn't be just a, hey, here's a spot, you can go right up against this other restaurant. I think that could be addressed in the standards that are developed for the food trucks.
Possibly a certain distance away from the restaurant, if they're not going to be competing.
Commissioner Cabrera?
I agree with Commissioner Sotole's assessment of the situation. And I think that Mr. Sherko has the right idea. Santee has something similar where they have a preliminary kind of designated areas where the food trucks can go depending on which part of the city that they're in. And I think it's something that we can kind of analyze. I think it's a great idea from the staff to be looking at this. And we can kind of follow a similar pattern so that they're not right next to a restaurant or right next to something competitive. And now also freeing up, like a lot of times the breweries or other restaurants do want to have a little something extra, and they want to bring in a food truck. Easing those regulations for them, I'm making it some kind of standard, I think is a great idea. I think you're both talking down the same path. I think the solution is to come up with a pattern and some areas that they can go to. And I think it might solve both problems and help all of them. I like where the staff's going with this, I guess is what I'm saying.
Awesome. Any other comments for food trucks? All right, moving right along. Home occupation businesses. Any comments on that?
Currently, does someone that operates a business out of their home, do they need a business license?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And then what would stipulations be? How would you be able to differentiate between a accountant who might have, one or two people show up, to get their tax returns during the course of a day versus maybe somebody with 3 employees and, 20 or 30 people a day? But what are your ideas on that? Or is this just as far as you guys have gotten?
Well, we actually did some research last year when this first came up and kind of surveyed a bunch of different jurisdictions to look how they handle it. Some put a limitation on how many employees. They might say you could have 1 employee as long as you have an off-street parking space for them. Some also have kind of a tiered system. So you could have your basic home occ business license, but if you want to have employees or if you want to have customers, then you're in sort of a lower, permit process so that can be evaluated.
Okay.
Commissioner Cabrera?
So the business occupation, is that primarily office professional? I'm assuming there's a limitation to like having a car repair shop in your house.
So right now, the only thing that you can have is a home office, and it's allowed in all of our residential zones. So all of your business has to be, your in-person business has to be conducted off-site. You can really just have, phone and computer and files and that type of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually had to talk to our neighbor at one point because he was running an auto tuning shop in his garage, which faced my children's bedrooms. So we got revving engines and we went over there and said, this isn't allowed. Like, oh no, it's allowed. I was like, I beg to differ. So they stopped.
I feel your pain.
But to clarify, it would be allowing in-home businesses without any foot traffic. Is that correct?
So we currently allow, with just a business license, a home office with no employees and no customers. So that's currently what's allowed. We would be proposing that we consider expanding or relaxing that to allow for some limited employees or limited customers to actually come to somebody's home. Like the accountant example I gave. Currently, if you're an accountant with a home occupation business license, if you want to meet with a client, you have to go, to a coffee shop or someplace offsite or to their home. This would, allow for someone to have some clients perhaps come to their home to receive services.
Or a music teacher or dance studio?
Yes, like a music teacher as well.
Okay, sounds good to me.
All right. So we look forward to reviewing the language when it comes up. Commercial and industrial reuse parking. This one seems very straightforward to me, that we've got a built out city for the most part, and we've got large commercial and industrial buildings with large parking lots, and the uses may be different, but we can't expand and contract the parking lots depending on who's in the building. And within reason, I think that allowing for a new business to occupy the building, even though they're industrial or commercial rather than the other, without having to reevaluate the parking lot situation and get those 9 more parking spaces, may be worthy of our consideration. What do we think?
I don't have any problem with that. I think it's a good idea. They're both oriented, and I think that we can be flexible and provide more services to our community as well as business people.
I agree.
Cool. All right. Spencer, I thought I saw your hand go up. Okay.
Sorry, cleaning crew was coming by, so I waved at them.
Oh. All right. Melissa?
We'll keep going then. We just have one more slide with that. Oh, can you go back one more? There you go. So this one's more focused on encouraging investment in the city. So these would be more towards new projects or reuse projects. So the first one really has come about because we have now mostly infill projects. Sites are constrained, and people come in with ideas for projects where maybe they can't quite meet a specific development standard. Like they can't, they're short a couple of parking spaces, or maybe lot coverage. They can't quite meet lot coverage and still do the project they want to do. And oftentimes some of these projects really do have merit, but at that point, we don't really have a mechanism to allow for them to move forward for consideration. So what we'd be proposing here is that we have, perhaps at a staff level and perhaps at a planning commission level, a process whereby an applicant could bring forward a project that deviates from our development standards, provided that they meet certain findings. And
can you clarify the difference between this and the variance?
Sure. So a variance, with a variance, a project essentially has to have some sort of unique circumstance that prevents them from complying with that standard. An example I usually give is a property that's on a hillside, and they can't, they're building a house, but they can't meet the front yard setback, or else they would have to shift the house towards the rear of the property where the steep hillside is. So in that case, there's a particular specific circumstance, that makes them eligible for a variance. Instead of having hardship findings like a variance, this deviation process would instead have findings that relate more towards this being, a benefit to the city. So they're, requesting maybe a deviation from lot coverage, but they're able to maybe build a couple of extra units, or they're able to provide, housing for larger families, 3 or 4 bedroom units, or maybe they're able to do something else that's, unique and creative, and still meeting the intent, obviously, of, the zone and the zoning code.
All right. Thank you. Any comments on deviation process? I think that's a fantastic idea for businesses. We've seen a few businesses come forward with a business model that is 98% in compliance, but can't get that last 2%. And we've had to turn them down because it doesn't fit. It's just not quite. And it's not that we don't want it, it's that we've got a lot to uphold. I think this process would allow for those projects, it's a shoehorn, so to speak, to get it to squeeze into the law. Commissioner Cabrera?
I believe the deviation of the development standards for something creative is what we're all here for, honestly. I think it's a beautiful idea. And I would only say that I would like to see it also worded where the planning administration actually has the ability to make quick decisions on it, rather than it having to go through a full conditional use permit or something. I would like to see the planning department be able to make a decision administratively and give them that power, because they know the regulations very well, and they know that, this creative deviation will be something that they can positively support. Like, they'll probably know right away. So I would just try to empower that a little bit more to the planning group.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with that. We've seen a lot of good with the SCRs and minor amendments, where we have review every 6 months on the projects that they've approved through those processes. And maybe something similar would happen with this, where we just see what has been done under the deviation process. And then we can review if there's some difficulties or if there are some challenges, the staff can pop that up to our level. But on the whole, it would be something that would be administrative, so that it gets answered and that business has an answer when they leave, rather than, well, we'll schedule it for the next planning commission meeting in a month.
Agree.
Any other comments from commissioners?
I think that's a good idea, just because in this environment we're in right now, when that month might cost the business its business. So, if people are trying to be creative with their business, I think, that would be a good way to kind of help think outside the box to help people thrive in the current state we're in.
All right.
Okay. So we'll keep going. The next one that we're considering is to allow for more projects to go through the SCR and the minor amendment process. So right now we have some screening criteria that, for instance, limit the addition size that you can do under a minor amendment to 10% of the existing building. So we think that there might be an opportunity to expand that a little bit more. So we'd like to bring that back before you. And then the next one is to take a look at our commercial and industrial land use tables in our zoning code, and for those uses that require permits, to see if there's opportunities maybe to reduce those permit levels down, or even maybe propose eliminating some use permit requirements if appropriate. So that would just be a review that we would do, and then bring forward anything that we think potentially should be looked at.
So clarifying that would mean taking the permit process off and allowing them by right.
Potentially for some instances, yeah. We've done this in the past where, we've reconsidered a particular use and changed it. I think one of the ones that we've recently done has been in around on-sale alcohol. And we've kind of tested out using the minor use permit process, which is administratively approved versus a planning commission decision. And I think that's worked out really well. So we can see where else we might apply that.
Okay. Question from Mr. Cabrera.
I'd like to encourage the evaluation of the use, mixed use, the use permits, but also encourage the possibility of additional mixed uses, considering that we're trying to do that in a downtown area and other areas, that just kind of open our minds a little bit, and also not just have the evaluation of a different use, but actually a mixed use.
Okay. So then the next item would be to actually consider allowing for some expanded uses within our commercial zones. So right now, you know, pre-COVID, we knew that we had some excess commercial space in El Cajon. And we know that probably when the dust settles after the pandemic has waned, we will have even more commercial space. And so we're anticipating that we're going to have vacant storefronts and vacant commercial buildings. And we know that we also have had a fairly high demand for industrial space in El Cajon. We have a fairly large industrial center. So the idea here would be to look at whether or not we could allow for some light manufacturing in some of our commercial zones, like our regional commercial zone, which is, you know, separate away from residential uses. And then secondarily, could we allow for maybe the reuse of commercial buildings that are more in our residential areas to be repurposed to residential units? So that would be more like in our office, professional, and neighborhood commercial zones. So it's all in and around how do we adaptively reuse maybe some of these excess commercial buildings so that they're used in a positive manner and, you know, don't become blight in the neighborhood.
I think that's a good idea.
All right, any questions on the adaptive reuse?
Again, I'd like to see the adaptive reuse. I think that's a great idea on a case-by-case basis, but I'd like to see the adaptive reuse also be able to maybe also be a mixed use kind of a thing. So let's say they're changing some of the offices upstairs to a curator's unit, and then downstairs it's still commercial, rather than the whole thing.
I agree with that.
Likewise, I agree.
It's a good comment. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments on this last slide? No. Okay. So we can go next slide. Basically, we don't need any action taken tonight. I'm going to take all of the feedback that you provided to me, and we'll be coming back to you in January with a resolution of intent. Have a little bit more description of each of these for your consideration at that time. So that concludes this item.
And Mr.
Thank you
Chair,
very much.
Mr. Chair, we did receive a chat comment, and it relates to the food trucks. It's from Aaron Milonzi. I apologize. And he says, I support relaxing requirements on food trucks in the city. I agree with the chair's point that food trucks thrive on the ability to be flexible in where they post up and serve people.
Thank you, Mr. Valles. And thank you to, oh, my window just changed. Hold on, let me find you again. Aaron Milonzi? Yeah. All right. Next item on the agenda is agenda item number 4, which is a workshop on the housing element update. It is an informational report. It is not subject to CEQA, and staff is recommending that it is informational only. Staff.
Great, thank you. We're getting the PowerPoint up here, just a moment. So this is just a workshop item. It's informational. We wanted to give you an update on where we are with the housing element. We started the update process. You can go to the next slide, Spencer. Back in April of this year, and we have a consultant that's helping with us gathering data, helping to draft the element, and then staff has been focused on public outreach. Oh, can you go back one more, please? Thank you. And so where we are now is we're at the point we want to get some preliminary input on the housing sites. And so that's what we're going to be presenting to you today. Just a little background, the housing element was last updated in 2013. It is updated every 8 years per state law. And some of the components of the housing element include an analysis of the housing needs. So what type of housing is needed by certain populations in the city. We also look at constraints or barriers to housing, and these can be things like governmental constraints or other potential constraints to housing. And it includes a sites inventory, and that is an exhaustive list of sites that can develop with housing over the next 8 years. That's what we'll be focused on looking at today. And the last big component is the programs. And those are programs that are intended to facilitate new housing or address the housing needs of the community. Next slide. So in our public outreach, we've done 3 virtual meetings, as well as we've been working with stakeholder groups, such as the El Cajon Collaborative and the East County Homeless Task Force. And we've also had a survey up on our project webpage and our story map. And what's really come out as kind of the major issues is our concerns, as you would expect, about affordability, the supply of new housing, as well as in and around housing security and stability. So the concern that there's families at risk of losing housing and that we need to make sure that they're taken care of. There's also been some concerns expressed about poor condition of housing and need for some of our aging housing to be updated, with electrical and plumbing improvements. The survey did indicate that there appears to be support for different types of housing for different segments of our population, right? From affordable housing for lower income families to senior housing, all the way to housing that's intended to provide a step up from homelessness for individuals. That can be emergency housing or transitional and supportive housing. Next slide. So our last element, we had a regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA as it's known, of 5,805 units, which was a very large allocation. Last time was the largest one by far that we'd ever received. And just about to date, although we don't have the numbers for 2020 yet, we've had about 702 new units built over that time. So there's obviously a very large gap between the housing need and what housing is being produced, which is not unique to El Cajon. I think there's only 1 or 2 jurisdictions that have built their RHNA in California. And so that's part of the reason that there's this focus on housing and the housing element to see what we can do to help bring up those numbers. In our last housing element, we also had programs focused on providing first-time homebuyer assistance through the HOME program, funding fair housing services through CSA, and also some housing rehabilitation programs like our single family and mobile home rehab programs. And those programs are still ongoing today.
Right, and I'm going to jump in here and kind of discuss what our current regional housing needs allocation is. This is just the basic breakdown of which types of units we're supposed to be looking to build as a city. The total is 3,280. And so kind of moving on here, looking at the different criteria for sites and how those factor into our calculations and in meeting that 3,280 mark. So obviously first we're looking at density and what that means in terms of affordability. So you can kind of expect that the 0 to 10 dwelling units per acre would be a more single family type product, a less affordable product. The 10 to 30 dwelling units per acre would kind of represent the moderate category, and then 30 dwelling units per acre or above would be more of a affordable apartment development or something of that nature. Also looking at the vacant or underutilized sites, as we all know, the vacant sites are getting less and less. So infill sites and underutilized sites are definitely a focus. Then also, assessing what barriers there are to housing, if that's, governmental constraints or private side, what the barriers are. And then it's worth noting that for all of the sites that are previously identified in our housing element in the past, or are already developed, if they're infill sites, there's a additional justification that we have to provide with those sites to the state. So it gets a little more complicated when we're built out as far as we are, and trying to find those the best sites to include in our inventory. And so kind of the strategy so far has been to look at the sites that we know we have some sort of expressed interest in developing as residential, or some other key factors. Those might be, the very few vacant sites are obviously going to be kind of those other factors. And then once we've kind of accounted for those where we think there might be some potential for new residential, kind of the focus will be on the mixed use overlay zone areas and the transit district specific plan area, to try to fill the gap in meeting that RHNA count. And so I guess with that, we have a couple maps. I'm going to stop the share for just a second so I can open up a couple different things.
While Spencer's getting that ready, I'll just preface what we're looking to do tonight is to show you kind of what we've identified thus far, and then hopefully maybe spur some discussion around ideas where the commission would like us to focus for identifying additional sites, or if you have knowledge of specific sites that you think would be prime for housing development. As Spencer mentioned, with that additional justification burden, the burden is now on the city of El Cajon to demonstrate to the state that these sites can develop with housing over the next 8 years. And so that finding that justification or that evidence, is going to be difficult. So we're looking for things like whether or not a property owner has, a short-term lease with a tenant and is looking to sell the property, or things like that that can support that this site could develop with housing.
And this was just a basic kind of overview map, taking the existing zoning and kind of grouping it into those kind of density categories that I had mentioned. And that's, again, this is just taking our existing zoning and grouping it together and displaying it in a fashion where you can kind of see where the affordability levels might be moving forward. And then I think another one that we wanted to take a look at, just as an example of what goes into our analysis here, is improvement to land value, for example, would be something key to see if a site is being utilized to its potential or not. And maybe those sites that are not are good ones to start with, to trying to meet that RHNA count and identifying its potential for developing as residential. I'm going to pull up the main map now that we kind of want to discuss. So give me 1 second. Screen share that as well. Okay. And can everyone see that? Yes. Okay. Okay. It says my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully, if I cut out, I'll have to listen to Melissa for cues, I guess.
No worries. You sound good.
Okay.
I did want to provide a caveat before we jump into this map too far.
Okay.
The green sites were sites from our last housing element that were vacant and underutilized. So these would not actually appear on our final sites map. I think the consultant just provided them here for informational purposes, but some of them have already developed or have approved entitlements for housing.
And yeah, I just want to jump off and I guess start with how this is broken down here. So the first and second tier sites are the ones that staff has already identified as having some sort of expressed intent to develop as residential, or we received questions about it in the past, or it's kind of just an ideal site, like that 6-acre property on East Main Street that's vacant. So those would be the first and second tier sites. And then what we really hope that we could focus our efforts on would be looking in the TDSP, the transit plan area, and the mixed use overlay, the MUO, so the pink or purple and blue sites, if you have any suggestions in those areas in particular. I guess, should I kind of overview the tier 1 and tier 2s really quickly? And I can see that my map is updating a little bit slower for you, so I'll try not to speak ahead of it updating. But for example, we know that the Parkway Plaza Mall is actually within the mixed use overlay zone. and it is under new ownership as far as I'm aware. And so that might be a site potentially in the future that may have some residential development. And so we've identified it as a tier 1 site for the purposes of calculating our arena numbers and seeing if we're getting close. Another key site was the directly above the trolley station, the MTS site. And I believe that they're currently, Melissa, if you could chime in
Sure.
here, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what stage of.
There is a memorandum of understanding between MTS and the city of El Cajon to jointly solicit development on that site. And so that's moving forward, not very quickly, but the hope is that there would eventually be possibly a housing or mixed use project there.
Another site that we were recently made aware of was the former auto dealership here on El Cajon Boulevard. Hopefully everyone can see my mouse moving there. And so I don't know, do we want to talk about this further, or do we want to get some feedback?
Yeah, I think we can just explain this. So the purple sites here are the ones that are within the transit district overlay. The blue ones or the mixed use overlay. But really, we're not constrained to that. We can really look at any potential site that allows for housing and that we would want to consider for housing in El Cajon. So we're just kind of looking for some feedback from the commissioners, if you have specific sites or if you think we're on the right track here with our analysis.
Okay.
Or even blocks or areas.
Right. Well, I was curious, we don't have any sites noted in the entire Gillespie Field industrial area, and that's primarily because it is industrial, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I know from experience that there's a grand total of 17 residents in that whole section of the map.
Yeah, we're really looking at areas that are already zoned for residential or mixed use, like in the mixed use overlay. A lot of the area in and around Gillespie Field is also constrained by the airport land use compatibility plan. So besides there being maybe some incompatibilities in use, it's constrained by the airport. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning here that we have to consider when we're selecting sites is the new requirement that we be affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a mouthful of words to say, but I think can be distilled down to the state does not want to see us identifying all of our housing sites in what they might consider lower resourced areas or areas where there is already maybe a lot of multifamily or affordable housing. They would like to see the sites that we identify, spread across the city in various neighborhoods, especially in what are considered more higher resource neighborhoods.
What do you mean by higher resource?
So that would be neighborhoods where there's more access to public facilities, better educational facilities, higher property tax rates, those types of things. So those neighborhoods in El Cajon would be more like Fletcher Hills, Olive Hills area, the south, kind of the perimeter of the city, whereas the census tracts in the middle of the city are considered to be more disadvantaged neighborhoods.
So
They want it to be equally disadvantageous or advantageous.
So with those areas that you're referring to, they're pretty well built out, Fletcher Hills, Olive Hills, Granite Hills. What about redeveloping the area that's, got those old apartments that have been there since the 70s, maybe doing some condo conversions, some first-time homeowner buys, things like that. I don't know if it pencils yet to do condo conversions, but then you really get that home ownership, first-time home buyer deal, which I think would put more people invested in the community when they own something. Any talk on that, or is that something we can put in the element?
So we can definitely look at home ownership and increasing home ownership rates, especially maybe in our disadvantaged neighborhoods, but that wouldn't actually net us an increase in units. So if we did a condo conversion, it wouldn't help us get towards our RENA numbers unless we were adding units at the same time. The one thing I will mention is accessory dwelling units can also count towards our RENA requirements. And so that's one way, especially in our built out areas that are more established residential neighborhoods, where we can achieve more units.
And then obviously this is, we have to have our zoning, like we did last time, kind of prepared with ideas, but like we built 700 units last time. I mean, what does the state, is there a penalty for that? I mean, there's only nothing they can do. I mean, it is what it is. It's the free market. So there's no real penalty for that, correct?
There's not a penalty per se for not meeting your RENA production requirements, but it does trigger, it can trigger the ability for someone to come in and do by right housing, essentially, to cut out discretionary review of projects. That's it. It doesn't often happen because it has to be coupled with
Living wage.
yes. So basically, there are things that are in place that they're trying to encourage people to increase their housing production. I think it's likely in the future we could see even more legislation in and around penalizing cities for not meeting their RENA. It's moving in that direction. There's more and more teeth in state housing law where there wasn't before. For instance, if we don't adopt a housing element, now we can be fined. Now we can be subject to, civil liability for that. So there's a lot that's happening in and around housing at the state level that I think we need to be aware of.
So our housing element, that's huge. We've got to get that done. But what you're talking before by right is just somebody coming in and building something without the city's approval. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, if we didn't have something identified as a standard objective, we would just have to approve it, or an objective standard. So, for instance, if, the city didn't, or if we didn't meet our RENA, which we're not, obviously, for the last housing element cycle, we identified Parkway Plaza for a housing site under this current cycle, and that gets approved. That means that someone could come in with building permits to build 500 new residential units at Parkway Plaza. And the only thing that we would be able to use to evaluate that project are what are termed objective development standards. So right now in our zoning code, mostly that's just bulk development standards, height, that type of thing, setbacks.
But that would only be obviously the owner of that land would be the one that would have to initiate that though, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So this is kind of a way to keep the state off our back still, is trying to do the best we can with our housing element and encouraging development.
Yes.
One of the things that in Elkhorn we suffer from is the poorly built apartments from the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And a lot of those are just 2-story walk-ups, which I think are quite charming. I lived in one of those for almost 7 years. No, I lived in one for 8 years. And I enjoyed my apartment, the camaraderie that I felt with the other residents. But at the same time, the apartment was falling apart slowly. We had many issues with the infrastructure. The porch was starting to sag. They had to replace all the railings because kids could actually fit through the bars. I wonder if this would be something that we could put in where instead of adding apartments in new locations, we look at some of the sites where we've got these aging apartment complexes and stack them one more layer, give them a third story, but have them rebuild and make them the hard part about making something nice is then it costs more. And we want to have affordable housing, but the price of lumber has gone up in the last 50, 60 years.
Yeah, once you get over 2 stories, 3 stories, just the whole cost to build goes up. So, yeah, it's just, I mean, what about most of the county, as far as I know, they've really squashed development, and they're really trying to shove it all back in the cities. But as you know, especially with the pandemic, everybody's trying to get out of the cities. Do you see the county relaxing some of their areas, maybe even allowing us to widen our footprint of the city or anything like that? I mean, what's the county's role in this?
So the county has to prepare their own housing element for the unincorporated areas. But you're right, with their last general plan update, they really focused new development kind of within some of their village areas. I think in terms, I think you're alluding to like annexation, potentially expanding the boundaries of the city. The areas where we would expand, and I don't know if Spencer, if you could pan maybe to the southwest, or
I was thinking to the north center area.
I mean, southeast. I don't know what I'm
okay.
saying. If you kind of just look at this right here, you can see that within the boundaries of the city, it's much more densely developed. And then you go outside of the city and you'll have large lots, more rural zoning. And I don't know that would net us enough new units that the cost of providing those additional services to kind of that lower density development would really make sense. There could be some limited circumstances where an annexation, would get us a property that could be used for housing. But I don't know that it's going to be necessarily a viable strategy for getting to our arena, over the next 8 years.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because, one of the things I'm seeing is I'm really just seeing that they're really going to try to push, high density in all different areas. And I really feel like your long-term effect is going to be quality of life is going to decrease for everybody because we don't have the roads. We don't have the infrastructure. I look at some of these intersections now, and I can imagine another 1,000 people a day traveling there. I look at some of the areas that need to be fixed, and rather than fix them, we're just going to, continue to. So I kind of see where they're trying to go. I just don't know how we can do this smartly without, destroying the charm of the city, so to speak.
Well, I will point out, I think an advantage that we have that we didn't have last time is we already have done the mixed use overlay and we already have the transit district plan. So I do not anticipate that we'll need to do any additional rezonings if we select sites that are within those areas. So that, that's really that kind of triangular shaped area around the transit district, and then kind of the downtown, as well as the blue on Fletcher Parkway, and then over on the East Main side and Parkway Plaza. So I think that if we focus there, we won't have to add anything other than what's already been approved in terms of additional units. It's really just honing in on what sites are most prime for development, what's going to be easiest for us to justify to the state that these properties can redevelop with housing.
Great.
Melissa, when you say hone in, what does that mean specifically? You need to have a developer coming in with their money wanting to develop it.
Mm-hmm.
When you say that we hone in, what do we hone in on, the developer to convince him to do it, or what do you mean exactly by those words?
So I think you almost do need a bit of a crystal ball to do the work that the state's asking us to do, which they're asking us to have some sort of foreknowledge of which of these sites could potentially develop with housing. So, I know each of the commissioners has connections throughout the community. And so we're hoping that, if you have specific knowledge of a site, a particular property that of, that a property owner may be interested in doing housing, or you think this is a very underutilized site, this is, this has the likelihood to redevelop. I think that's sort of maybe some of the input that we're looking for from the commissioner. If your direction to staff is really just, focus on a specific general area and identify, as many sites as we can in that area, then we can do that as well. For instance, if you want us to focus on the transit district area for identifying sites, that's where we can focus our efforts. If you want us to focus downtown, we could do that as well. Or if there's any other areas in the city you feel are prime for housing.
For me personally, the transit district would be the most viable situation, because the transit district is a place where there's a need of redevelopment and lots of improvement. There's older buildings there and a lot of industrial buildings. So I think that would be more viable than any place else.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. It really grieves me that we live in an environment where instead of government from the bottom up, it now seems to be government from the top down. That's really a freedom killer.
I have a few comments and a couple of questions. One was, I think Commissioner Moroz brought up a good question about the county. The county is doing quite a bit for the RENA numbers. One of the big things they're doing is trying to do infill developments, small developments, and they have a little group of people that actually help you to develop these particular parcels that might be zoned one way and another, and you can develop it with 11 units or 30 units or something small. So there is some movement there from the county. As far as Melissa was stating, yeah, there is quite a few places that I know of that developers are interested in. One of them was right across the street from the area that we were looking at for the church and the hospital. There's a old doctor that owns the spot right off of East Madison, and those two parcels actually are zoned quite nicely for housing and commercial development. And I think the height limit's even 30 feet or something there. So I know quite a few developers that have been looking at that lot and quite a few other lots. Honestly, I can send you a list. I believe that the ADU is going to make a good dent in the RENA numbers in the future. It's just starting right now. But I believe that that's going to be kind of a nice way of solving some of the problem. It's not going to solve the whole problem, but I think it's going to put a good dent in it in the future. As far as the housing element goes, though, and meeting those RENA numbers, I had a question. I posted it. Oh, how much credit do we get per SRO unit towards our RENA count? So does that count every SRO as one towards our RENA count, or are they counting it as half or something? What are they doing with SROs?
That would be a full unit, I believe.
Yeah, and those units will get credit for on the last housing element, not for the one moving forward.
I see. So then there's a potential for more SROs. I kind of saw you had some areas there. And then I agree with Commissioner Sherko. I think was hitting on something that eventually will have to happen. I went to school in Scottsdale, and I remember how the airport used to be there. And considering the fact that now with the new fuel sources and the way that the computers can run the tanks of the airplanes, and how we can actually get to Japan and back again. I used to belong to one of the companies that was a Forbes 500 company, and we were able to take the private airplanes from Scottsdale all the way to Japan and back again, and then have a little apartment or places at the airport. And it was very convenient, and it made for a really great dynamic area. I mean, shops started showing up, a lot of housing, and being able to park your airplane there and then just sleep overnight in your apartment was quite convenient. So eventually, I think there's going to be there has to be some movement in that area. But I think it was very successful for Scottsdale, and I think it's something that we might want to look at in the future.
Just to clarify on that, Commissioner Cabrera, so the airport authority is responsible for the airport land use compatibility plans. And so
Right.
unfortunately, it's not really within the city's control to change that or modify that. But I think that's something that could use some advocacy in the future.
That's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Exactly. The advocacy portion of it. Maybe I'll get to work on that.
Okay. Was there any other feedback on specific sites that the commission would like us to be looking at for the sites inventory?
I have noticed that the Caltrans sites that used to have houses, the houses got bulldozed primarily along the 3rd corridor. So Spencer a bit further to the east, but there, yeah, along Melody and then up where 3rd runs into Oakdale. I've noticed a few of those sites no longer say Department of Transportation, but have realtor signs on them.
Yeah, they recently sold a handful of the properties. If you can see where my mouse is now, I believe this site at the top corner, this larger parcel, this parcel here, which we have a current proposal under review, this parcel here, and this parcel here.
Nice. Okay. I was just curious about that because I remember when I was looking for a house, I considered buying one of those vacant lots and building a house, but the Department of Transportation told me they weren't for sale yet. I was like, okay.
That happened within the last year and a half or so, I believe.
Nice. Much better to be on the public market than in the Department of Transportation.
I have a quick question regarding, I know you said the ADUs and junior, I don't know of junior ADUs since they aren't really a separate thing, but they are more housing, hypothetically speaking. But I know in doing them in San Diego and La Mesa and other areas in real estate, the permitting process is very slow going. And I haven't done any in El Cajon yet with any of my clients, but I just didn't know how the processes are, the turnaround time on that for the ADUs. Because I know with the pricing where it is, that is very, a lot of the people are looking for properties that have buildable land and want to build the ADUs and junior ADUs. So with the city of El Cajon, do you know what the turnaround time is on permitting and getting that cranked out for El Cajon?
Well, I guess I can answer. The current standard is 3 to 4 weeks for the first building permit review, and then 2 weeks for any corrections that need to be made.
Okay.
That's the standard currently, but I think, Melissa, if you want to chime in and make sure I'm saying it correctly, some of the new state regulations call for us to have a strategy to promote ADU creation, and so that will be something that we need to look into in the very near future. So one of those strategies could be streamlining of processing potentially, or there could be a handful of other promotional opportunities to make sure that the process goes smoothly.
Okay. Because I know some of the other areas have like canned plans or something like that that they can use to kind of streamline the process.
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, the county does offer kind of pre-approved, so to speak, plan sets. They just need some minor modifications by the applicant. And technically you could use those within the city as well. We would just have to go through our normal building review process since they're not pre-approved, so to speak, in El Cajon.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think if there aren't any other comments on the sites inventory, we could just go back to the PowerPoint. I think the last item that we had on the housing element was just to give you an overview of some of the zoning code changes that we're going to have to consider based on state law to implement our housing element. So I wanted to make sure that you're all aware of those as well. A couple of the changes in and around shelters have to do with a new type of shelter called a low barrier navigation center. And this is really just kind of a first step into housing. Like the name suggests, it's supposed to have a few barriers, meaning people can bring maybe a partner, a pet, and their belongings into this type of emergency housing. And then they'll be connected with a caseworker to help them find permanent housing. So we don't have provisions for this yet. We'll have to allow for it in all of our residential zones or all of our zones that allow residential as well. So we'll be looking to add that in as a permitted use. And then there was also a change for emergency shelters, a parking change in state law. So it limits how much parking we can require to one space per employee. On the supportive housing side, supportive housing is really just housing with kind of a little bit of added extra support for people to keep them housed. So, maybe like a social worker checking in with them, can be on-site or off-site services. And there have been some changes there in terms of the standards and parking. And so we'll need to make sure that we're compliant with the state law on supportive housing. And then the next big changes have been in and around density bonus. So the typical density bonus has always been 35%, which is the maximum density bonus you can get for affordable housing. And the state has upped that. So now if you're building a project that's 100% affordable, you can get a density bonus of 80%. So kind of rough math, if you had oh, did you have a question?
Yeah, what is the density bonus? How does that work exactly?
Okay, so right now, if you build a project and a certain number of your units were restricted for affordable housing, and it depends on the income level. So if it's very low versus moderate, you can get additional units up to 35% of the number of units that you could get under the zoning. So right now, if you could get 100 units under current zoning on a sizable site, you could get 35 extra units, density bonus units on that site under current density bonus law. The new state law says, well, if 100% of those units are you have a 100 unit affordable housing project, you can build 80 extra units, build 180 total units. So this is an increase, obviously pretty substantial, that we'll need to address in our zoning code. The density bonus law goes even further and identifies that for projects that are within half a mile of a transit stop, that there's no limitation on residential density. So the limitation then really becomes the building envelope and how many units you can fit in the building envelope. It also would allow for a project to go up an additional 3 stories over and above what they're allowed.
It would circumvent cities, whatever the city parameters were. Let's say we don't like to go higher than 48 feet. They're saying that they would allow it to go another 30 feet above that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's only within the half mile of the transit stop, though.
Okay.
For affordable housing projects. And then there's been some pretty broad reductions on parking requirements for density bonus projects too. For those near transit, it's about half a space per unit, but if it's a supportive affordable housing project, there's no parking requirement. And so we'll be looking to have to implement some of these state laws through our zoning code in the future. And that will come probably a little bit later after a housing element is adopted, but there'll be programs that you'll see in our housing element that will have to be addressing these items.
So what if they get a parking reduction and then we have a parking problem? How does that work?
It doesn't matter to them. We've got transit.
Yeah, but I mean, I've noticed even people in the lower income, they all still own cars. So
Yes, they do.
Well, the state likes it because it's less pollution, according to the state.
sure.
The state would prefer that we don't own our own cars and use public transportation. And so I read a bunch of different green planning magazines, and the idea is, and I have to admit that if I had no knowledge of the working class, I would think this too. If you don't have parking spots, then you won't have a car. But we all know from living in an apartment that when there's one parking spot assigned, there's two working people with cars living in that space. And so one car goes in the spot, the other car goes on the street.
Yeah,
And this is what we've been struggling with in El Cajon for a while.
yeah.
But the new parking bonuses, the parking reductions, would actually allow for a very large project with no parking on site.
Exactly.
If it's within a half-mile transit, the idea that Sacramento has bought into is that young people with no money are going to park close to public transit.
Yeah, but public transit's still only, I think, what is it, 3 to 5% ridership, maybe? So yeah, okay.
Well, they're also
Melissa,
trying
how
to
does
raise
the
taxes on our cars.
Melissa, how does the environmental justice portion that's coming down have an effect on bonus density considerations or locations of where you have to put the RENA numbers? Does the new environmental justice kick in for that?
There is the interplay between environmental justice and the housing element. And part of it is around that discussion that I mentioned about affirmatively furthering fair housing. So making sure that housing is dispersed throughout the city and that, more affluent neighborhoods are taking their share of, of more affordable housing units. So that, I think that's where that interplay is with environmental justice. With density bonus though, there's not really a consideration for it. And considering that, a lot of transit stops are actually within kind of lower resourced or disadvantaged communities. There is the potential for there to be more units with, fewer parking and less amenities in these areas.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's all I have on this slide, unless there's anything further. Okay, move on. So just to wrap this up, we'll be working on the housing element over the next couple of months, and we hope to have a draft available at the end of January. Our plan would be to come back before the Planning Commission for a workshop on the draft in February, and then proceed to hearings in May and June. We do have a statutory deadline to complete the housing element by April 15th of 2021, but they do give us kind of a 4-month grace period or extension period. So we'll be moving a little bit into that just so that we can make sure that we're getting our environmental justice and our safety elements updated at the same time, and that we've got all the public outreach that we need conducted, which has been very challenging during the pandemic. So that concludes our presentation on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to normal view. I can see you all again. All right. I believe that was our last informational item. We do have a review of our proposed 2021 Planning Commission meeting schedule. Did you all
Excuse
see
me,
that?
Mr. Chair?
What's
Mr.
that?
Chair, there was a public chat comment that we received from Patrick Grillett. And he goes, I am very supportive of the idea that the city should prioritize meeting its RENA target. The entire region needs more housing supply to improve affordability, and developing more housing of almost any kind will support that goal. I agree with a TDSP approach to developing high density housing and MU development near the transit district. I also support reducing barriers to developing housing like parking minimums, density limits, CUPs for MU development. These costs will either deter developers altogether or will drive up rental or mortgage costs on what does get built. And there are no other comments.
Thank you, Mr. Vyas. Melissa, in the mixed use overlay, when we put that into place, you don't actually have to get a CUP to use the mixed use. That's another layer on the zone, correct?
You don't need a CUP up to 40 dwelling units per acre, but between 40 and 60 dwelling units per acre, we would require a CUP.
Okay, thank you. I thought we had done that to make it easy and streamline that for when the owners decide to develop that way. Thank you, Mr. Vyas, and thank you to Patrick Grillot for your comments. Let's see. Oh, yes. So planning commissioners, you saw the proposed 2021 Planning Commission meeting schedule, continuing with the first and third Tuesdays, with the exceptions of our holidays. And I think, wow, we missed Thanksgiving next year. So we've actually only got one holiday schedule meeting that isn't on the calendar. That would be December 21st. With that exception, we're set for a full agenda if we can have enough business to meet for. Do we need any, we just see the calendar and say, yep, we're still good with first and third Tuesdays?
Yes, we don't need a motion. You can just concur that you find it acceptable.
All right. And then it looks like we've got project updates.
I think in the interest of time, since the meeting has gone on a bit long, I'll defer that, but I'm happy to discuss with the commissioners individually if they have any questions about any projects.
All right, thank you. All right, any commissioner reports or comments? Okay, let's move along to my favorite item on this agenda tonight. Well, maybe not my favorite, but it's one we all look forward to. This Planning Commission meeting is adjourned to January 5th, 2021 at 7 p.m. At least that's my motion.
I second it.
Motion made by Commissioner Circo, seconded by Commissioner Cetile. Please, a roll vote, please.
Paul Circle,
Yes.
Humber Cabrera,
Yes.
Darren Morose,
Yes.
Rebecca Pollock-Rude,
Yes.
Anthony Sotile.
Yes.
This motion passes unanimously.
All right. So we